The great hall of the Galactic Concord had not seen such fear in 3,000 years. The 12 elder species sat in their ancient seats, their faces pale and their hands shaking. The massive screens on the walls showed readings that none of them wanted to believe. The numbers were clear. The barriers were failing. The nightmare was waking up. Ambassador Keth Voran of the Cillian Dominion stood at the center of the hall. His forearms hung limp at his sides. His silver eyes, which had seen empires rise and fall, now held only terror. He had been the first to receive the readings from the Korath expanse. He had checked them 7 times, hoping for an error. There was no error. The containment field will fail completely within 1 standard year, he said. His voice, usually so strong and commanding, came out as barely a whisper. The Vethkai are waking. All of them. The hall erupted into chaos. Representatives shouted over each other. Some called for evacuation. Others demanded that the old weapons be found and rebuilt. A few simply sat in silence, their minds unable to process what was happening. High Counselor Maranthax of the Vorathi Collective slammed her staff against the floor. The sound echoed through the chamber like thunder, and slowly the noise died down. "We must remain calm," she said. But even she could not hide the tremor in her voice. "We survived the Vethkai once. We can survive them again, can we?" The question came from Ambassador Drelimak of the Korthan Empire. He was old, even by the standards of the elder races. He had been a child during the last war, but he still remembered the screams. "We lost 2 entire species to seal those monsters away. 2 species gave themselves up completely just to power the containment field. And now you say we can do it again? With what? With whom?" No one had an answer. The Vethkai were not like other enemies. They were not a species that could be reasoned with or bought off or frightened into retreat. They were a hive mind, a vast network of billions of creatures, all controlled by a single overmind. They did not want territory or resources or power. They wanted only one thing: to consume. Every living thing they encountered became part of them. Every ship they captured was broken down and rebuilt into their own twisted forms. Every mind they touched was absorbed into the collective dot. 3,000 years ago, the 12 elder species had united against this threat. It was the greatest alliance in galactic history. Trillions of soldiers had fought. Millions of ships had burned. The war had lasted for 200 years, and when it was finally over, the galaxy was broken. The Vethkai had been sealed behind an interdimensional barrier in the Korath expanse, a prison of pure energy that required constant power to maintain. That power had come from the Metheri and the Sylveni, 2 species who had chosen to give up their physical forms and become pure energy, forever feeding the barrier that kept the monsters locked away. It was the greatest sacrifice in history. And it had worked. For 3,000 years, the galaxy had been at peace. The elder races had rebuilt. They had grown comfortable. They had forgotten. The weapons that had held back the Vethkai were gone now. The factories that had built them had been dismantled. The soldiers who had known how to fight the hive mind were long dead. The elder races had convinced themselves that the nightmare was over forever. They had been wrong. "We must contact the other species," said Ambassador Vex Thil of the Drenari Sovereignty. "The younger races. Perhaps they have something we do not." "The younger races are children," scoffed Counselor Thiessen of the Orme Federation. "What could they possibly offer us? The Kraliks are peaceful traders. The Manovi are artists. And the humans." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. The humans still fight amongst themselves. They are barely out of their caves. High Counselor Maranthax raised a hand for silence. "Nevertheless, we must try. Send word to all species in the Concord's territory. Tell them what is coming. Perhaps together we can find a solution." But even as she spoke, Everyone in the room knew the truth. There would be no solution. The elder races had grown soft and weak. They had traded their warriors for diplomats, their weapons for art. They believed that peace would last forever. Now, the galaxy would pay the price for their arrogance. In the observer gallery above the main chamber, a single figure sat in the shadows. She was small by the standards of most species, barely 2 meters tall. Her skin was the color of bronze, and her dark hair was pulled back in a tight braid. She wore the simple gray uniform of a diplomatic attaché, and on her shoulder was a patch that showed a blue and green planet circled by a single moon. Commander Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Diplomatic Corps had been assigned to the Galactic Concord 6 months ago. It was supposed to be a quiet posting. The elder races rarely acknowledged humanity's existence, and when they did, it was usually to remind humans how young and primitive they were. Elena had spent most of her time reading reports and attending ceremonies, where humans were very pointedly not invited to speak. But she had also been listening, and watching, and learning. Now, as she watched the most powerful beings in the galaxy fall apart in fear, she felt something strange stirring in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it. It was anger. These creatures, these ancient and supposedly wise beings, had known about the Vethkai threat for millennia. They had built the barriers. They had watched them slowly weaken over the centuries, and they had done nothing. They had been so certain that the problem would never come back that they had simply forgotten about it. And now they were going to let the entire galaxy burn because they had forgotten how to fight. Elena stood up from her seat and walked out of the gallery. Her boots echoed in the empty corridor as she made her way to the communications center. The staff there barely looked at her. Humans were beneath their notice. She found an empty terminal and began typing. The message was short. It would be encrypted and sent through 17 different relay stations before reaching Earth. By the time it arrived, Elena would probably be thrown out of the Concorde for accessing restricted information. She did not care. The message read, "Threat level, extinction. The Vethkai containment is failing. The elder races have no plan and no means to fight. They started something 3,000 years ago that they could not finish, requesting permission to clean up their mess." She pressed send and waited. The response came faster than she expected. Much faster. It was only 3 words, but they were enough. Permission granted. Incoming. Elena smiled for the first time in months. Meanwhile, in the great hall below, the elder races continued to argue. Some wanted to flee. Others wanted to hide. A few suggested building new barriers, even though they had no idea how the original ones had been constructed. The debate went on for hours, going in circles, accomplishing nothing. It was Ambassador Kethvora who first noticed the change in the readings. He had been watching the screens showing the Karth expanse, tracking the slow death of the containment field. But now, new signals were appearing. Ships, hundreds of them. Then thousands. They were emerging from hyperspace near the edge of Concorde territory, and they were moving fast. "What is this?" he demanded. "Who authorized a fleet movement?" The technician scrambled to identify the ships. When the answer came, no one could believe it. "They are human vessels, Ambassador. Over 2,000 of them. They are broadcasting on all frequencies." High Counselor Marinthax stood up slowly. "Put it through." The main screen flickered, and a new image appeared. It showed a human woman with gray hair and hard eyes. She wore a uniform covered in medals and insignia, and behind her, through a wide viewport, the stars were thick with warships. "This is Admiral Chun Wei-Lin of the United Earth Expeditionary Coalition," she said. Her voice was calm and cold. "We have received intelligence about the Vethkai threat. We are here to deal with it." For a long moment, no one in the hall could speak. Then Counselor Thiessen stepped forward, his face twisted with confusion and something that might have been disgust. "This is absurd," he said. "You are humans. You have no stake in this fight. The Vethkai are not your enemy. They do not even know you exist." Admiral Chun's expression did not change. "That is correct. They do not know we exist. Yet, but they will. And when they do, we would rather meet them on our terms than wait for them to come to Earth." "You do not understand what you are facing," said Ambassador Kethvorin. "The Vethkai destroyed civilizations that had existed for millions of years. They consumed species that had mastered technologies beyond your comprehension. You are children playing with fire." "Perhaps," said Admiral Chun, "but we have been playing with fire since we lived in caves. We are very good at it." The hall erupted again, but this time the noise was different. There was outrage, yes, but there was also something else. Something that the elder races had not felt in a very long time. Hope. Hi. Counselor Murinthax raised her staff for silence. When the noise died down, she spoke directly to the screen. "Admiral Chun, you must understand our concern. Humanity is a young species. You have been spacefaring for less than 3 centuries. You have never faced an enemy like the Vethkai. If you engage them and fail, you will only make them stronger. Every ship you lose, every soldier they consume, will become part of their swarm." Admiral Chun nodded slowly. "We understand the risks, Counselor. We have studied your histories. We know what the Vethkai can do. But we also know something that you seem to have forgotten." "And what is that?" The Admiral leaned forward, and for the first time, something like emotion crossed her face. It was not fear or hope or even anger. It was determination, pure and simple. 3,000 years ago, 12 species decided that the Vethkai were everyone's problem. They were right. This threat does not care about borders or treaties or who arrived in space first. It will consume everything if it is not stopped. Your ancestors understood that. They paid for that understanding with blood and sacrifice. But you have forgotten. You have become so comfortable in your long lives and your ancient wisdom that you have forgotten what it means to fight for survival." She paused, letting her words sink in. Humans have not existed long enough to forget. We still remember what it means to struggle. We still know what it costs to protect what we love. And we are not afraid to pay that cost. The silence in the Great Hall was absolute. In the observer gallery, Elena Vasquez watched with tears in her eyes. She had never been prouder to be human. Ambassador Kethvorin spoke at last, his voice quiet. "What do you want from us, Admiral? What do you expect us to do?" Admiral Chun's answer was simple. Admiral Chun, stay out of our way. When this is over and the Vethkai are destroyed, we will return. And then we will have a very different conversation about humanity's place in this galaxy. The screen went dark. For a long moment, the elder races sat in stunned silence. Then, slowly, they began to talk amongst themselves. Some were angry. Some were relieved. Some were still trying to understand what had just happened. But all of them, in their own way, were beginning to realize the same thing. The galaxy had just changed. The humans were coming. And they were not coming to ask for help or to beg for approval. They were coming to do what the elder races had failed to do for 3,000 years. They were coming to finish what had been started. In the depths of space, the Expeditionary Coalition fleet moved toward the Koreth Expanse. 2,000 ships of war, carrying 9 million soldiers, armed with weapons that had been banned on Earth for centuries. They were not the largest fleet in the galaxy. They were not the most advanced. But they were human. And that, as the galaxy was about to learn, made all the difference. Admiral Chun stood on the bridge of her flagship, the carrier unconquered, and watched the stars streak past. Behind her, her officers worked in focused silence. There was no fear in this room. No doubt, only purpose. She thought about the elder races, sitting in their great hall, paralyzed by their own terror. She thought about the Vethkai, stirring in their prison, hungry after 3,000 years of sleep. She thought about the billions of people back on Earth, watching the news feeds, waiting to learn if their sons and daughters and parents and friends would come home. She thought about all of it, and she made herself a promise. The Vethkai would not reach Earth. They would not reach any world that could not defend itself. They would die here, in the cold emptiness of the Korth expanse, and their threat would end forever. The elder races had started this war 3,000 years ago. They had fought bravely and sacrificed much. But they had not finished the job. They had only delayed the inevitable. Now, it was humanity's turn. And humans always finished what they started. I will not lie to you. Many of us will not survive this mission. The Vethkai are not like any enemy we have ever faced. They are faster, stronger, and more numerous than we are. They have consumed species that had technologies we cannot even imagine. They do not negotiate. They do not surrender. They do not stop, but neither do we. We are human. We have been fighting since the day we were born. We have fought the elements, the animals, each other, and now we will fight these things. And we will win. Not because we are stronger, or smarter, or more advanced. We will win because we refuse to lose. We will win because giving up is not in our nature. We will win because Earth is behind us, and we will not let Earth fall. Mark. Jump. The fleet vanished into hyperspace, leaving nothing behind but the fading glow of their engines. On the Galactic Concord station, the elder races watched the humans disappear. Ambassador Kethvoran stood at his viewing window, his silver eyes fixed on the empty space where the fleet had been. "They are insane," said Counselor Thyssen, who had come to stand beside him. "They are flying into certain death." "Perhaps," said Kethvoran, "but I have been studying human history since they made their announcement. Did you know that they have been at war with each other almost continuously since they developed the ability to make weapons? That is not surprising. They are a violent species. Yes, but that is not what interests me. What interests me is that they have never stopped. In their entire history, no human nation has ever been completely destroyed. Oh, they have lost wars. They have been conquered, occupied, defeated. But they always come back. They always rebuild. They always fight again." Counselor Thyssen made a dismissive gesture. "That means nothing against the Vethkai. The hive mind does not allow survivors." "Perhaps. But consider this. The humans have a saying, we have never faced an enemy we could not eventually defeat. In all their history, across all their wars, they have never encountered a threat they could not overcome. And now they are facing the Vethkai with weapons we have never seen and strategies we do not understand." He turned to look at Thyssen directly. "I am not saying they will win. The odds are very much against them. But I am no longer certain they will lose. And that is something I never thought I would say about humans." The fleet traveled through hyperspace for 11 days. During that time, the soldiers trained, the crews drilled, and the commanders planned. Every scenario was analyzed, every contingency prepared for. Admiral Chun barely slept. There was too much to do. But she also made time to walk through the ship, to talk to the soldiers, to learn their names and hear their stories. She met young privates who had enlisted the day after the announcement and grizzled sergeants who had fought in 3 different wars on Earth. She met engineers who had designed the weapons they would use and medics who would try to save the wounded. She met chaplains of a dozen different faiths and soldiers who believed in no God at all. They were all afraid. She could see it in their eyes, hear it in their voices. But they were not running. They were not backing down. They were going to fight. On the last night before they reached the Korath Expanse, Admiral Chun gathered her senior officers in the briefing room. Intelligence reports that the containment field will fail completely within 72 hours, she said. The Vethkai Outriders are already pushing against the weakest sections. When the field goes down, they will pour through like water through a broken dam. How many? Asked Commander Park. Estimates range from 100,000 to 500,000 individual vessels. Troop numbers are impossible to calculate. The Vethkai do not operate in units the way we do. Every creature is both soldier and ship component. They can be reconfigured for different purposes at will. And we have 2,000 ships, said Captain Morrison, commander of the assault carrier Victory. The math is not encouraging. The math is irrelevant, said Admiral Chun. We are not here to win by numbers. We are here to cut the head off the snake. The Vethkai are controlled by a single overmind. If we can destroy it, the entire hive mind collapses. Every drone, every ship, every creature stops functioning. And where is the overmind? Deep inside the expanse. Our scouts have identified what appears to be a central structure, a fortress made of consumed ships and organic material. The overmind is there. She pulled up an image on the main screen. The structure was horrifying. It was the size of a small moon, a writhing mass of metal and flesh that seemed to pulse with malevolent life. Ships flew in and out of openings in its surface, like insects entering a hive. We are going to kill that thing, Admiral Chun said. And we are going to burn everything between us and it to make that happen. The officers stared at the image in silence. Any questions? Asked the Admiral. No one spoke. Good. Get your people ready. We arrive in 16 hours. And when we get there, we are going to show the galaxy what humans are capable of when we stop fighting each other and start fighting together. She stood up and looked around the room. The elder races had 3,000 years to finish this. They failed. We have one shot. Let us make it count. The meeting ended, and the officers returned to their posts. Throughout the fleet, soldiers checked their weapons one last time. Pilots ran through their flight procedures. Gunners calibrated their targeting systems. Everyone prepared in their own way for what was coming. And in the darkness of space, growing closer with every passing hour, the Korath Expanse waited. The barriers flickered and sparked. The Vethkai pressed against their prison, sensing freedom, sensing food. They had consumed 1,000 species. They had devoured civilizations that had existed for millions of years. They had broken the will of the galaxy's greatest warriors and absorbed their strength. They did not know about the humans. They did not know that a species born of struggle and conflict, forged in the fires of countless wars, hardened by centuries of violence against their own kind, was coming for them. They did not know that humanity did not fight to survive. Humanity fought to win. And when humans went to war, they did not stop until the enemy was destroyed completely. The galaxy was about to learn what that meant. And the Vethkai were about to discover that some prey bites back. The news of humanity's fleet spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Within hours, every species in Concord space knew that the young race from the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star had done the impossible. They had mobilized for war in less than 3 weeks. They had assembled a fleet larger than most species could build in a decade. And they were heading straight for the most dangerous enemy the galaxy had ever known. The elder races watched in disbelief. How could this be possible? Humans were supposed to be primitive. They were supposed to be weak. They spent most of their time fighting amongst themselves over petty differences in religion and politics and territory. They had only been in space for a few centuries. They should not have been capable of this, but the evidence was right there on every screen and sensor reading. 2,000 warships, 9 million soldiers, weapons that made the elder race's scanners flash warnings they did not understand. The humans were not bluffing. They were really going to war. On Earth, the mobilization had been unlike anything in human history. For the first time since the species had crawled out of the oceans millions of years ago, every nation on the planet had agreed on something. The Vethkai were coming. If they were not stopped, Earth would be consumed. There was no debate. There was no argument. There was only action. President Maria Santos of the United Americas stood before the combined assembly of world leaders in Geneva. Behind her, screens showed images of the Vethkai from the ancient records that the elder races had shared. The creatures were nightmares given form. Their bodies were twisted combinations of flesh and metal, constantly shifting and changing. Their ships were alive, grown from the bones of consumed species. Their eyes, if they could be called eyes, held no emotion, no mercy, no thought except hunger. "This is what we face," President Santos said. "This is what the galaxy has been hiding from for 3,000 years. The elder races sealed these monsters away and then forgot about them. They grew comfortable. They grew weak. And now the seals are breaking, and they have no way to stop what is coming." She paused and looked around the room. Every face was pale. Every eye was wide. But there was no panic. "Not yet. We have a choice," she continued. "We can wait here on Earth. We can hope that the Vethkai turn in another direction. We can pray that some other species will rise up and stop them. Or we can take our fate into our own hands. We can go out there and kill these things before they ever learn that Earth exists." The Prime Minister of the European Federation raised his hand. "Madam President, with respect, our combined military forces are not designed for this kind of operation. We have never fought an enemy like the Vethkai. We do not know their weaknesses. We do not know if our weapons will even work against them." President Santos nodded. "You are right. We are facing an unknown enemy with untested weapons. We will be fighting in territory we have never seen, against creatures we do not fully understand. Many of us will die. Perhaps most of us." She stepped forward, and her voice grew stronger. "But we will not die hiding in our homes, waiting for the darkness to find us. We will die fighting. We will die screaming defiance at an enemy that thought us weak. And if we are very lucky, if we fight hard enough and sacrifice enough, some of us will live to see a galaxy free of this threat forever." The vote was unanimous. Earth went to war. Within days, shipyards that had been producing civilian vessels were converted to military production. Factories that made consumer goods began producing weapons and ammunition. Scientists who had been working on agricultural technology were reassigned to weapons development. Every nation contributed what it could. Every person who was able volunteered. The response was overwhelming. Recruiting stations were flooded with volunteers. Young people who had never held a weapon in their lives lined up to receive training. Old soldiers who had retired decades ago came out of their homes to offer their experience. Doctors, engineers, pilots, technicians, everyone who had any skill that might be useful came forward. But it was not just the willing participation that surprised the galaxy. It was the weapons. For centuries, Earth's nations had competed with each other for military supremacy. They had developed weapons for every possible scenario. Biological agents that could kill specific species while leaving others unharmed. Nuclear devices small enough to fit in a suitcase, but powerful enough to destroy a city. Nanotechnology that could disassemble matter at the molecular level. Artificial intelligences designed specifically for war. Most of these weapons had been banned by international treaty. They were considered too dangerous, too cruel, too likely to cause suffering, that went beyond the necessities of war. They had been locked away in secret vaults, never to be used. Now, those vaults were opening. Project Prometheus was the classified designation for humanity's most terrible weapons. It included things that the scientists who created them had hoped would never be needed. Things that had been built not for war against other humans, but for war against something far worse. Something that had no mercy and deserved none in return. Admiral Chen Wei-lin reviewed the arsenal aboard her flagship and felt a strange mixture of pride and horror. The weapons were effective. There was no doubt about that. They would kill HFY by the millions. But they would also kill in ways that no one should ever have to see. Her executive officer, Commander James Park, stood beside her as they examined the manifest. The bioweapons are designed to attack the HFY's neural network, he explained. They spread through physical contact, and once inside a host, they begin disrupting the connection between individual drones and the overmind. Infected drones lose coordination. They become confused, violent, eventually turning on each other. Admiral Chun nodded slowly. And the nano-dissolution swarms? Those are for the ships. HFY vessels are partially organic. The swarms eat through the organic components, causing structural failure. A single swarm can disable a capital ship in less than an hour. And Hellfire Protocol? Commander Park hesitated. Admiral, I have to advise against using Hellfire Protocol except as a last resort. The collateral damage would be significant. I know what it does, Commander. I asked if it was ready. Yes, Admiral. It is ready. Admiral Chun turned away from the screens and looked out the viewport. The fleet was gathering at the staging point, ships arriving from all over Earth's territory. Each one represented thousands of men and women who had volunteered to face an enemy that had destroyed civilizations, far more advanced than their own. She wondered how many of them truly understood what they were getting into. Probably not many. They had seen the images and the reports, but seeing was not the same as understanding. They would understand soon enough. Commander, she said quietly, do you believe we can win this? Park was silent for a long moment. I believe we will make the HFY regret ever waking up, he said finally. Whether that counts as winning depends on how many of us are left when it is over. Admiral Chun smiled grimly. That is the most honest answer I have heard in weeks. Thank you. The fleet departed 3 days later. As they left Earth's solar system, the entire planet watched. Schools and offices closed so that everyone could see the ships disappear into hyperspace. There were no parades or celebrations. This was not that kind of departure. Families said goodbye to loved ones they might never see again. Parents hugged children. Spouses held each other and whispered promises they hoped they could keep. Some people cried. Others stood in stoic silence. A few raised their hands in salute as the ships passed overhead. On the bridge of the Unconquered, Admiral Chun received one final message from Earth before the fleet entered hyperspace. It was from her daughter, who was 8 years old and did not fully understand why her mother had to leave. The message was simple. Come home soon. Mama, I love you. Admiral Chun saved the message to her personal file and then turned to face her crew. All stations report ready, said the communications. Officer, navigation plotted and confirmed, said the helmsman. Weapon systems online and standing by, said the tactical officer. Admiral Chun sat down in the command chair and took a deep breath. All ships, this is the flagship. Prepare for hyperspace jump on my mark. Our destination is the Korath Expanse. Our mission is simple. We are going to find the HFY, and we are going to kill every single one of them. If the elder races wanted this job done properly, they should have finished it 3,000 years ago. They did not. So now it falls to us. She paused. The message came through every human ship simultaneously. It was not words in any language. It was something deeper, a pressure inside the mind, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. You are flesh. You are temporary. You will be consumed. On the bridge of the unconquered, Admiral Chun felt the message like a physical blow. Around her, crew members cried out, grabbing their heads, falling to their knees. The pressure was immense, a weight crushing down on her thoughts, trying to break her will. 3,000 years ago, this message had shattered the morale of the elder races. Commanders had surrendered entire fleets rather than face the Overmind's psychic assault. Soldiers had thrown down their weapons and waited to be consumed, convinced that resistance was impossible. Admiral Chun did not surrender. She stood up from her command chair, blood trickling from her nose, and activated the fleet-wide communication system. All ships, this is the Admiral. The enemy is trying to break our spirits. They want us to be afraid. They want us to give up. She paused, wiping the blood from her face. Let me tell you something about fear. Humans have been afraid since we were born. We were afraid of the dark, so we invented fire. We were afraid of the cold, so we built shelters. We were afraid of predators, so we made weapons. We have never let fear stop us. We have always taken our fear and turned it into something useful. So yes, I am afraid. I am afraid of dying. I am afraid of losing this battle. I am afraid of what will happen to Earth if we fail. But I am not going to let that fear control me. And neither are you. She looked around at her crew, at the men and women who had followed her into this nightmare. We are human. Fear is our oldest companion. We do not run from it. We use it. We let it sharpen our focus and quicken our reflexes. We let it remind us what we are fighting for. So, when the enemy tells you that you are temporary, remind them that temporary things can still burn very, very bright. She keyed the broadcast system again. All ships, this is my response to the Vethkai. Increase attack speed. All weapons free. Make them regret every moment they spent sleeping while we were learning how to fight. The fleet obeyed. Ships that had been holding back now charged forward. Weapons that had been conserved were unleashed without restraint. The human fleet was smaller than it had been 5 days ago. They had lost 60% of their vessels. But the survivors fought with a fury that the Vethkai had never encountered. By the 9th day, the Vethkai had lost 80% of their forward swarm. They were retreating. The elder races, watching from their distant stations, could not believe what they were seeing. The Vethkai, the great devourers, the terror that had haunted the galaxy for millennia, were running. Running from humans. Running from a species they had never even heard of until 3 weeks ago. Ambassador Keth Voran stood at his viewing screen, watching the battle unfold. His hands were shaking. His eyes were wet with tears he did not bother to hide. They are doing it, he whispered. They are actually doing it. Beside him, Counselor Thiessen was silent. His arrogance, his dismissal of humans as primitive and irrelevant, now seemed like the foolishness of a child. He had been so certain that humanity would be destroyed. He had been so sure that the elder races were the only ones who understood the galaxy. He had been wrong. On the bridge of the unconquered, Admiral Chun allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. But only a moment. The battle was not over. The Overmind still lived. As long as it existed, the Vethkai could rebuild. They could replace their losses. They could come back stronger than before. The main swarm was broken, but the war would not be won until the heart of the hive mind was destroyed. She turned to her communications officer. Contact the whispered end. Tell Captain Tanaka it is time. The message was sent, and somewhere in the darkness of the Korth expanse, a single ship began its final journey. 200 crew members, One ship, one chance. The fate of the galaxy rested on their shoulders, and they were ready to pay any price to finish what had been started. The containment field collapsed 6 hours before the human fleet arrived. Admiral Chun received the news while standing on the bridge of the Unconquered, watching the last of her ships emerge from hyperspace. The ancient barriers that had held the Vethkai for 3 millennia had finally failed, and now nothing stood between the hive mind and the rest of the galaxy. Nothing except 2,000 human warships and 9 million soldiers, who had traveled across the stars to stand in its way. "Report," Admiral Chun ordered. Commander Park pulled up the tactical display. The screen showed the Karth expanse as a vast, swirling darkness, and within that darkness, thousands of red dots were moving. Each dot was a Vethkai vessel. They were pouring through the gap where the barrier had been, spreading out like blood from a wound. "Initial count is approximately 200,000 enemy vessels," Park said. "More are emerging every minute. They are heading toward the nearest inhabited systems. At current speed, they will reach the Cillian border within 3 days." Admiral Chun studied the display in silence. 200,000 ships against 2,000. 100 to 1 odds. Any sane commander would have ordered a retreat. Any reasonable species would have accepted that the battle was already lost. But humans had never been particularly reasonable. "Split the fleet into 3 battle groups," she said. "Battle Group Alpha will engage the main swarm directly. We need to slow them down and draw their attention. Battle Group Beta will execute hit-and-run strikes against their supply lines. Cut off their reinforcements and make them fight on our terms." "And Battle Group Gamma?" asked Park. Admiral Chun turned to face him directly. "Battle Group Gamma consists of a single ship. The stealth destroyer Whispered End. Captain Tanaka and her crew will have one mission: reach the Overmind and destroy it." The bridge fell silent. Everyone knew what that mission meant. The Whispered End would be flying into the heart of the enemy territory, alone, with no hope of reinforcement or rescue. It was a suicide mission. Captain Tanaka volunteered, Admiral Chun said quietly. Her entire crew volunteered. They know what they are doing. Our job is to make sure they have a chance to do it. She turned back to the display. "All ships, this is the Admiral. Battle stations. We engage in 30 minutes. Throughout the fleet, alarms began to sound. Soldiers rushed to their positions. Pilots climbed into their fighters. Gunners powered up their weapons. The massive engines of the warships roared to life, pushing the vessels forward into the darkness. The Battle of Korath's Gate had begun. The first engagement was brutal. Battle Group Alpha, led by the Unconquered, smashed into the leading edge of the Vethkai swarm at full speed. Human ships opened fire with everything they had, filling space with missiles, plasma bolts, and kinetic rounds. The weapons worked better than anyone had hoped. Vethkai ships exploded by the dozens, their organic hulls ripping apart under the assault. But for every enemy ship that died, 10 more took its place. The Vethkai fought like nothing the humans had ever encountered. Their ships did not move in formations or follow tactical patterns. They swarmed like insects, flowing around obstacles, filling every gap, pressing from every direction at once. And they adapted. Weapons that worked perfectly in the first hour became less effective as the battle continued. The hive mind was learning, adjusting, evolving. On the bridge of the Unconquered, Admiral Chun watched the casualty reports scroll across her screen. Ships were dying. Men and women who had families back on Earth, who had signed up to fight for humanity's survival, were being consumed by the darkness. Each loss was a knife in her heart, but she did not let it show. She could not afford to. Her crew needed to see strength, not sorrow. "The destroyer Defiant is gone," reported the communications officer. "The cruiser Melbourne is badly damaged and losing atmosphere. The carrier Victory reports multiple hull breaches. Tell Victory to fall back to the secondary line, Chun ordered. Redirect our fighter screen to cover their withdrawal. Admiral, the Vethkai are attempting to board us. The warning came from the tactical officer, and Chun felt her blood run cold. Boarding was the Vethkai's most terrifying tactic. They did not capture ships. They consumed them. The drones would tear through hull plating, pour into the corridors, and kill everything they found. Then they would take the ship apart piece by piece, absorbing its technology into their own twisted forms. Seal all outer compartments, Chun commanded. Security teams to defensive positions. If those things get inside, we fight them with everything we have. The first boarding pods hit the Unconquered's hull like meteors. They punched through the armor plating and disgorged their cargo. Vethkai drones, each one a nightmare of flesh and metal. The creatures were roughly humanoid in shape, but that was where the similarity ended. Their limbs were too long, their joints bent in wrong directions, and their faces were smooth, featureless surfaces broken only by mouths filled with needle-like teeth. Security teams met them in the corridors. The fighting was savage, desperate, and brutal. Human soldiers fired until their weapons overheated, then fought with knives and bare hands. The drones were stronger and faster, but the humans were stubborn. They did not retreat. They did not surrender. They died where they stood, buying time for their shipmates with their blood. Private First Class Maria Gonzalez was 19 years old. She had enlisted 3 weeks ago, the day after President Santos's speech. She had never fired a weapon at a living target before today. Now she was crouched behind a barricade made of cargo containers, firing burst after burst at creatures that seemed to absorb bullets like water. Her squad had started with 12 soldiers. Now there were 3 left. They just keep coming, shouted Corporal Chun, no relation to the Admiral, as he slammed a fresh magazine into his rifle. There's too many of them. Maria did not answer. She was too busy shooting. A drone leaped over the barricade, and she caught it in the face with a point-blank burst. It went down twitching, but another was right behind it. This one got close enough that she could smell it, a horrible stench of rotting meat and burning metal. She shoved her rifle into its mouth and pulled the trigger until the weapon clicked empty. Fall back. Someone was shouting. Fall back to the engine room. Maria ran. She ran through corridors slick with blood, past bodies she did not have time to identify, past fires and sparking cables and holes in the walls that showed the cold void of space. Behind her, she could hear the drones following, their claws scraping against the deck plates. She made it to the engine room door just as it began to close. She dove through the gap, rolled, and came up with her sidearm drawn. The door slammed shut behind her, and she heard the drones smashing against it from the other side. "Welcome to the party," said Sergeant Williams, a massive man with burns covering half his face. He was holding a heavy machine gun like it weighed nothing. "You made it just in time. How long can we hold?" Maria asked. Williams shrugged. "Long enough, I hope. The Admiral says we just need to buy time. So that's what we're doing." "Time for what?" "Damned if I know. But I trust the old lady. She's got a plan." Outside the engine room, the drones continued to pound on the door. But inside, the surviving crew of the Unconquered held their ground. They had nowhere left to run. So they would fight, and die, and hope that their sacrifice meant something. The battle raged for 5 days. 5 days of constant combat, of ships exploding, of soldiers dying. The human fleet was being torn apart piece by piece. But they were not breaking. Every time the Vethkai thought they had won a victory, the humans counterattacked. Every time a ship went down, its crew fought to the last moment, making the enemy pay for every life they took. And slowly, impossibly, The tide began to turn. Battle Group Beta's hit-and-run tactics were working. By attacking the Vethkai supply lines, they were starving the main swarm of reinforcements. Ships that might have joined the battle were destroyed before they could arrive. Drones that might have replaced the fallen were consumed by bioweapons that spread through their ranks like wildfire. The nano-dissolution swarms were particularly effective. Human drones dropped canisters of the microscopic machines onto Vethkai vessels, and within hours, those vessels were falling apart. The living ships screamed, a psychic wail that made human crews grab their heads in pain as their own bodies turned against them. On the fifth day, the Vethkai Overmind made a decision. For the first time in 3,000 years, it chose to communicate with its enemy. At 800 kilometers, a tendril smashed into the hull, tearing open a gash that sent atmospheres screaming into space. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut, but not before a dozen crew members were sucked into the void. At 600 kilometers, the engines failed. "Report," Tanaka shouted. "Engine room is gone, Captain," came the reply. Direct hit. Direct hit. Chief Martinez is dead. The warhead is intact, but we have no way to reach the target. No way to reach the target. Tanaka stared at the display, watching their momentum slowly bleed away. They were drifting now, a crippled ship surrounded by enemies. The fortress was close. So close, but not close enough. Unless someone carried the warhead the rest of the way. "Prepare the emergency pods," she said. "Load the warhead into Pod 1. I want a volunteer crew to take it the final distance." Captain Chun started to protest. "No," Tanaka cut him off. "This is my ship and my mission. I am staying at the helm. But someone needs to finish the job." Before Chun could respond, the ship rocked with another impact. More compartments were breached. More lives were lost. They were running out of time. "I will go," said a voice from the back of the bridge. Lieutenant Amy Reeves stepped forward. She was young, barely 25, with red hair and freckles that made her look even younger. She was the ship's primary weapons officer. "I know the warhead systems," she said. "I can arm it and detonate it manually if necessary. Lieutenant, Captain, with respect, we do not have time to argue. Give me a pilot and 2 engineers. We will get it done." Tanaka looked at the young woman and saw no fear in her eyes, only determination. "Very well," she said. "Take whoever you need. And Lieutenant, thank you." Reeves nodded and ran from the bridge. Within minutes, a team of 4 had assembled. They loaded the warhead onto the emergency pod and sealed themselves inside. The pod launched from the dying Whispered End and began its final journey toward the heart of the fortress. On the bridge, Tanaka watched them go. The pod was so small, so fragile, but it was moving. The Vethkai defenses focused on the larger ship did not immediately notice it. "All hands," Tanaka said. "Abandon ship. Use the escape pods. Get as far away as possible." "Captain, what about you?" Chun demanded. "Someone needs to keep the enemy distracted. I am the distraction." She turned to face her executive officer, the man who had served beside her for 15 years. "David, go. Take everyone who is still alive and go." "That is an order." Chun stared at her for a long moment. Then he straightened, saluted, and headed for the door. "It has been an honor, Captain. The honor was mine." He was gone. Tanaka sat down in the command chair and watched the displays. The escape pods were launching, scattering in all directions. The Vethkai were pursuing some of them, but most of their attention was still on the Whispered End. Good. That was exactly what she wanted. She looked at the pod carrying the warhead. It was 500 kilometers from the center now. 400. 300. A tendril lashed out and destroyed it. No, Tanaka's heart stopped. The pod was gone. The warhead was gone. Everything they had sacrificed, everyone who had died, it was all for nothing. And then she saw it. A single figure in a spacesuit, tumbling through the void. Lieutenant Reeves. She had ejected from the pod just before impact. And she was carrying something in her arms. The warhead. It was small enough for one person to carry. Barely. And Reeves was using her suit thrusters to push herself toward the fortress. Toward the pulsing heart of the Overmind, with the weapon clutched against her chest. The Vethkai saw her. A tiny figure, insignificant, easy to destroy. Defense tendrils began to turn in her direction. Tanaka grabbed the flight controls. Her ship was dying, but it still had maneuvering thrusters. It still had weapons. It could still move. She threw the whispered end directly into the path of the tendrils. The ship exploded around her. Fire and metal and pain. But she had bought Reeves a few more seconds. A few more meters. At 100 kilometers, Reeves reached the outer layer of the fortress. She pushed through organic material, swimming through a sea of horrors, the warhead still in her arms. At 50 kilometers, the Overmind tried to stop her. Drones converged on her position. She killed them with her sidearm, a weapon that should not have worked in this environment, but somehow did. She kept moving. At 10 kilometers, she could feel the Overmind's mind pressing against hers. It was trying to break her, to consume her thoughts, to make her stop. She did not stop. At 1 kilometer, her suit was breached. Atmosphere escaped. She could feel the cold of space seeping into her body, feel her lungs struggling for air that was no longer there. But she was close enough now. Amy Reeves looked at the pulsing mass before her, the center of the hive mind, the thing that had terrorized the galaxy for thousands of years. She thought about her family back on Earth, her parents, her sister, her nephew, who had just started kindergarten. They would never know the Vethkai existed. They would grow up safe and happy, never understanding how close they had come to extinction. That was enough. She armed the warhead. Captain Tanaka, her body broken and burning, her ship shattered around her, saw the detonation on her dying sensors. A flash of light brighter than a star, spreading outward, consuming everything it touched. She smiled and whispered her last words. From Earth, with love. The Overmind died screaming. And 200 kilometers away, the last escape pods of the whispered end watched as the heart of the hive mind was erased from existence. The mission was complete. The stealth destroyer, Whispered End, was small. Compared to the massive carriers and battleships of the main fleet, she was barely a speck. Her hull was painted black, designed to absorb sensor beams and blend into the darkness of space. Her engines were specially modified to run almost silent, producing minimal heat signatures. She was not built for battle. She was built to slip past defenses unnoticed. Captain Yuki Tanaka stood on the bridge of her ship and watched the distant flashes of the main battle fade behind them. For 8 days, she and her crew had been running silent, traveling deeper and deeper into the Korath expanse while their brothers and sisters fought and died to keep the Vethkai occupied. Every flash of light was a ship exploding. Every burst of static on the radio was another voice going silent forever. Her crew numbered 200. Engineers, pilots, soldiers, scientists. They had all volunteered for this mission, knowing exactly what it meant. None of them expected to come home. The mission was simple in concept and nearly impossible in execution. The Whispered End carried a single weapon, a prototype quantum dissolution warhead. It was the most destructive device ever created by human science, capable of destroying matter at the subatomic level. Nothing could survive its detonation. Nothing could be rebuilt from its aftermath, but the weapon had a very short range. To use it, the The whispered end would have to get close to the Overmind. Very close. Close enough that escape would be impossible. Captain Tanaka had explained this to her crew before they departed. She had told them that this was a one-way trip. She had given every single one of them the opportunity to transfer to another ship. Not one person had accepted. Lieutenant Commander David Chen, our executive officer, stood beside her now. He was a tall man with gray streaking his black hair and lines on his face that spoke of too many battles. He had served with Tanaka for 15 years. He knew her better than anyone. "We are approaching the outer perimeter of the Overmind's territory," he reported. "Sensor contact in approximately 6 hours." Tanaka nodded. "How is the crew?" "Scared, determined, ready." "Good. That is exactly how they should be." She walked to the center of the bridge and looked around at the men and women who had chosen to die with her. They were all so young. Even the veterans, the ones who had fought in wars back on Earth, seemed young to her now. They had so much life ahead of them, so much potential, and they were giving it all up because someone had to. "I want to speak to the crew," she said. "All hands." Chun activated the ship-wide communication system and nodded. Tanaka took a deep breath. "This is the captain. In a few hours, we will enter the final phase of our mission. You all know what that means. We are going to fly into the heart of darkness, and we are not coming out." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I've been trying to think of something inspiring to say, some grand words that would make this easier. But the truth is, there is nothing easy about what we are doing. We are going to die. Not in some distant future, not in our old age surrounded by family. We are going to die today. But we are not dying for nothing. Every person on this ship is trading their life for something greater. We are trading our tomorrows for the tomorrows of billions. Every child who will grow up safe on Earth. Every family who will never have to face the Vethkai. Every generation that will live because we chose to die. I cannot promise you glory. I cannot promise that anyone will remember our names. But I can promise you this, what we do today matters. It matters more than anything any of us has ever done. And when the moment comes, when we face the end, I want you to remember that you are not alone. We are doing this together. All of us, as a crew, as a family. I am proud of every single one of you. And I am honored to die in your company." She fell silent. For a long moment, there was no sound on the bridge except the quiet hum of the engines. Then, from somewhere in the back, someone began to clap. Others joined in. Within seconds, the entire bridge was applauding, and through the intercom, Tanaka could hear the sound spreading through the ship. 200 people, facing certain death. Applauding not their captain, but each other. Tanaka felt tears on her cheeks, but did not wipe them away. "All stations," she said. "Prepare for final approach." The next 6 hours passed both too quickly and too slowly. The crew made their final preparations. Some wrote letters to loved ones, messages that would be transmitted back to Earth before the final run. Others sat in quiet meditation or prayer. A few gathered in small groups, sharing stories and memories. In the engine room, Chief Engineer Sarah Martinez ran her hands over the quantum dissolution warhead. It was a cylinder about 2 meters long, covered in warning labels and sealed connections. Inside it was enough destructive power to unmake a moon. "She is ready," Martinez said quietly. "Whenever you need her, Captain, she will do her job." Tanaka, who had come down to inspect the weapon personally, nodded. "Thank you, Chief, for everything." Martinez smiled, though her eyes were wet. "Just promise me you will push that button when the time comes. I did not spend 20 years becoming the best engineer in the fleet, just to have this thing fail at the last moment. I promise." They shook hands, and Tanaka returned to the bridge. The Overmind's fortress appeared on their sensors 2 hours later. Tanaka had seen images of it before, but nothing had prepared her for the reality. It was a moon-sized mass of twisted metal and pulsing organic material. Ships flew in and out of openings in its surface, feeding the endless hunger of the hive mind. Tendrils of flesh extended from its core, connecting to smaller structures that floated nearby like remeras attached to a shark. And at the center, buried deep within the layers of consumed civilizations, was the Overmind itself. The brain, the heart, the soul of the Vethkai. Detection range in 40,000 kilometers, reported the sensor officer. Once they see us, we have maybe 3 minutes before their defenses overwhelm us. Understood, Tanaka said. How? Calculate our approach vector. Find me the fastest route to the center of that thing. Captain, Chun said quietly, at maximum thrust, we will be torn apart by defensive fire long before we reach the target. We need to get closer before they detect us. I know. That is why we are not using maximum thrust. Not yet. She pulled up the tactical display and studied the fortress. It was heavily defended, but no defense was perfect. There had to be gaps, openings, places where a small ship might slip through. There, a section of the outer hull that seemed less active than the rest. The sensor showed it was some kind of waste processing area where consumed materials were expelled into space. It was disgusting and dangerous and perfect. We go in through the garbage, Tanaka said. They will not expect that. Chun looked at the display and then at his captain. After a moment, he nodded. Through the garbage it is. The whispered end adjusted her course, slipping through the darkness toward the fortress. The crew held their breath as they entered the outer perimeter. Every second, they expected alarms to sound, weapons to fire, death to find them. But nothing happened. They passed through the outer defenses undetected. The stealth systems were working. The Vethkai, so focused on the main battle, had not noticed a tiny ship sliding into their midst at 20,000 kilometers. They entered the waste expulsion zone. The ship was buffeted by debris and organic matter, chunks of metal and bone and things that had once been living creatures. The smell would have been unbearable if any of it had penetrated the hull at 10,000 kilometers. The first warning came. A patrol ship, one of the smaller Vethkai vessels, turned in their direction. Its sensors swept the area, searching for the anomaly it had detected. They see us, said the sensor officer. Not yet, Tanaka replied. They suspect. But they do not know. The patrol ship moved closer. 5,000 kilometers. 3,000. 1,000 and then it turned away. A collective breath was released on the bridge. They were still undetected at 5,000 kilometers. The fortress loomed before them like a mountain of nightmares. The hull of the whispered end scraped against protruding structures as they navigated through the maze of organic material. The lights on the bridge flickered as electromagnetic interference from the Vethkai's neural network washed over them at 2,000 kilometers. Everything went wrong. The Overmind finally noticed them. Tanaka felt it in her mind. A sudden pressure, a vast intelligence turning its attention toward her ship. It was like being stared at by a god, a cold and hungry god that saw her as nothing more than food. Alarms began to sound. Defense tendrils, massive organic whips covered in weapons and sensors, began to converge on their position. Patrol ships turned and accelerated toward them. The trap was closing. Maximum thrust. Tanaka ordered. All ahead, full power. The engine screamed as the whispered end surged forward. The stealth was useless now. Speed was all that mattered. Speed and distance at 1,000 kilometers. The first defensive weapon fired. A beam of concentrated energy sliced through the ship's port side, vaporizing 2 compartments and killing everyone inside. The whispered end shuddered but kept moving. The silence was the strangest part. For 11 days, the Korath expanse had been filled with the sounds of battle. Explosions, weapons fire, the screams of dying ships, the psychic howl of the Vethkai. Now there was nothing. Just empty space and floating debris. Admiral Chine Wei-Lin stood on the bridge of the Unconquered and watched the last of the enemy ships drift dead in the void. They were still intact, most of them. Their hulls were undamaged. Their weapons were still loaded. But the creatures inside them were gone. Not dead exactly. Just empty. When the Overmind died, every Vethkai in the galaxy died with it. The connection that bound them together, that made them a single vast intelligence, had been severed at its root. Without it, the individual drones were nothing. Mindless shells that simply stopped functioning. 3,000 years of terror ended in a single flash of light. The cost had been enormous. Of the 9 million soldiers who had come to fight, fewer than 4 million remained. Of the 2,000 ships that had crossed the galaxy, only 600 were still capable of moving under their own power. The Unconquered herself was barely holding together. Her hull patched with emergency seals and her engines running on prayers, and stubbornness. But they had won. Admiral Chun allowed herself a moment to feel that victory. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, letting the tension of the past 11 days slowly release from her body. They had done it. Against all odds, against enemies that had broken civilizations far greater than humanity, they had won. Then the moment passed, and she opened her eyes. "Damage report," she ordered. "All ships." Commander Park stepped forward with a datapad. His uniform was torn and stained with blood, some of it his own. He had fought hand-to-hand when the drones breached the bridge on day 7. He had killed 3 of them with a fire extinguisher before security arrived. "The fleet is in bad shape, Admiral. Most ships have critical damage. We are low on ammunition, fuel, and medical supplies. Casualty lists are still being compiled, but current estimates put our losses at around 5 million dead." 5 million! The number hit Chun like a physical blow. 5 million men and women who would never go home. 5 million families who would receive messages of condolence instead of their loved ones. The whispered end? She asked quietly. Park shook his head. No survivors from the ship itself. The escape pods were recovered, but only 43 crew members made it out. Captain Tanaka stayed on the bridge until the end. She gave the others a chance. Chun nodded slowly. She had known Yuki Tanaka for 20 years. They had served together on the first human expedition beyond the solar system. Yuki had always been the brave one, the one who volunteered for the dangerous missions, the one who put others before herself. Now she was gone. What about the final assault team? The ones who delivered the warhead? Lieutenant Amy Reeves was the only one who made it to the Overmind. She detonated the device manually. There was nothing left. Nothing left. Not even a body to send home. Just atoms scattered across the void. "They are all heroes," Chun said. "Every single one of them. Make sure the records reflect that." "Yes, Admiral." Chun walked to the viewport and looked out at the wreckage of the battle. Somewhere out there, among the floating debris and dead ships, were the remains of the whispered end. The ship had been small and quiet, designed to pass unnoticed. Now it was dust. "Set course for home," she said. "Slow and careful. We do not want to lose anyone else on the way back." "Admiral," said the communications officer, "we are receiving a transmission from the Galactic Concord. They want to speak with you." Chun sighed. She had been expecting this. "Put it through." The main screen flickered, and the face of High Counselor Maranthax appeared. The old alien looked different than she had during their last conversation. The arrogance was gone. The dismissiveness was gone. What remained was something that looked almost like respect. "Admiral Chun," she said, "on behalf of the Galactic Concord, I wish to express our gratitude. What you and your people have accomplished is beyond anything we imagined possible." "Thank you, Counselor," Chun replied. "But gratitude alone will not rebuild our fleet or bring back our dead. No, it will not." Maranthax paused, seeming to struggle with what she wanted to say. "Admiral, when humanity first appeared on the galactic stage, we dismissed you as children. We believed that age granted wisdom and that young species could not understand the complexities of the galaxy. We were wrong." Chun said nothing. "The Concord has called an emergency assembly," Maranthax continued. "All member species will attend. We would like humanity to be there as well. Not as observers, as full members, with a permanent seat on the council." Chun felt the eyes of her crew on her. They were listening to every word. This was the moment they had fought for. Not just victory over the Vethkai, but recognition, respect, a place at the table. But the cost had been so high. "I will relay your invitation to Earth," Chun said finally. "The decision is not mine to make, but I suspect the answer will be yes. Humanity has never been good at turning down a challenge." Maranthax nodded. "We will await your response. And Admiral, the galaxy owes you a debt that can never be repaid. What you have done here will be remembered for as long as civilization exists." The screen went dark. Chun stood in silence for a long moment. Then she turned to face her crew. "You heard the counselor. The elder races want to give us a seat at the table. They want to acknowledge that humanity belongs among them." She paused. "But remember this, we did not fight for their approval. We did not sacrifice millions of lives for a seat on some council. We fought because it was the right thing to do. We fought because someone had to. And if we had lost, if every single one of us had died in the Korath expanse, it still would have been worth it. Because that is who we are. That is what makes us human. Not our technology, or our weapons, or our ships. Our willingness to stand up when others will not. Our refusal to accept defeat. Our stubborn, stupid, glorious belief that we can make a difference." The elder races forgot that. They got comfortable. They stopped fighting. And when the darkness came, they had nothing left to stand against it. We will not make that mistake. Whatever happens next, whatever challenges the galaxy throws at us, we will face them the same way we faced the Vethkai. Together, as humans. With courage and determination and the absolute refusal to give up. She looked around at the tired, wounded, victorious faces of her crew. "Now let us go home." The journey back took 3 weeks. The damaged ships traveled slowly, limping through space, held together by emergency repairs and the sheer determination of their crews. More than once, a ship had to be evacuated when its systems failed completely. But no one else died. The fleet that had set out with 9 million arrived home with fewer than 4 million. But those 4 million were alive. Earth celebrated their return with a mixture of joy and sorrow. There were parades and ceremonies, speeches and memorials. The names of the fallen were read aloud in every city on the planet. It took 17 hours to read them all. The crew of the Whispered End were honored with a special ceremony on Luna. A tomb was built there, visible from Earth, carved from the gray rock of the moon. Inside the tomb were 200 empty coffins, one for each member of the crew. Their bodies were gone forever, scattered across the Korath expanse. But their spirits would be remembered. The inscription on the tomb read simply, "They went into the darkness so that we could stay in the light." Captain Yuki Tanaka and Lieutenant Amy Reeves were posthumously awarded every medal that humanity could offer. Their names were inscribed on monuments in every nation on Earth. Schools were named after them. Ships were christened in their honor. But for those who had known them, the medals and monuments meant little. What mattered was the quiet knowledge that two women had looked at certain death and had not flinched. That when the moment came, they had done what needed to be done. 1 month after the fleet returned, the Galactic Concord held its emergency assembly. For the first time in history, a human delegate was present not as an observer, but as a full member. Admiral Chen Weilin walked into the great hall with her head held high. She wore her dress uniform, the one with all the medals and ribbons and awards. Behind her walked a delegation of human diplomats, scientists, and military officers. The elder races watched her approach. Some of them remembered dismissing humanity as primitive. Some remembered calling humans children who did not deserve a place among the great civilizations. Now they stood in respectful silence as this human woman, this warrior, this hero, took her place among them. High Counselor Marinthax rose to speak. For 3 millennia, she said, we have called ourselves the Elder Races. We believed that age granted wisdom. We believed that we had learned everything the galaxy had to teach. We were wrong. She turned to look at Admiral Chun. Wisdom is not knowing when to start a war. Wisdom is knowing how to finish one. The Elder Races started the war against the Vethkai, but we could not finish it. We sealed away the thread and hoped it would never return. When it did, we were helpless. Humanity taught us a lesson we had forgotten. They reminded us that courage and determination matter more than age or technology. They showed us that a species young by our standards could accomplish what we could not. From this day forward, humanity speaks with the full authority of the Galactic Concord. They have earned that right in blood and sacrifice. They are no longer observers. They are no longer children. They are our equals. She paused. No, they are our teachers. The hall erupted in applause. Every species, every race, every civilization in the Concord was acknowledging humanity's place among them. It was a moment that would be remembered for as long as the galaxy existed. Admiral Chun rose to accept the recognition. She did not smile. She did not speak words of triumph or pride. Instead, she spoke of the fallen. I accept this seat not for myself, but for the millions who cannot be here. For the soldiers who died in the corridors of their ships. For the pilots who flew into enemy fire, knowing they would not return. For Captain Tanaka and her crew, who gave everything so that the rest of us could live. We did not come here seeking glory. We came because it was the right thing to do. Because someone had to stand up when others would not. Because we are human, and that is what humans do. The Vethkai are gone, but the galaxy is still a dangerous place. There will be other threats, other challenges, other enemies who think that peace has made us weak. When they come, we will be ready, not because we want war, but because we understand that peace must be protected. That sometimes the only way to preserve what you love is to fight for it. The elder races asked us why we came to their aid, why we risked everything for species that had dismissed and ignored us. The answer is simple, because we could. Because we had the ability to help, and that meant we had the responsibility to try. That is the lesson we brought to the galaxy. Not the lesson of war, but the lesson of duty. The understanding that power carries responsibility. That strength must be used to protect the weak. That no one is truly safe until everyone is safe. She looked around the hall at the faces of 100 different species. We are part of this galaxy now. We will stand beside you. We will fight beside you. And if another darkness rises, we will face it together. She sat down. The applause lasted for a very long time. Back on Earth, in bars and barracks, in ships and stations, the survivors of the battle raised their glasses in toast. Some toasted the victory. Some toasted the fallen. Some toasted the future that their sacrifice had made possible. But the most popular toast, the one that became legend among the human military, was the one that Captain Tanaka had favored. It was simple and direct, just like she had been. We came. We saw. We finished it. And in the cold darkness of space, where the Korath expanse still held the debris of the greatest battle ever fought, the stars continued to shine. The Vethkai were gone. The nightmare was over. The galaxy was safe. Not because the elder races had protected it, not because of ancient wisdom or advanced technology, but because a young species, a stubborn species, a species that had never learned how to give up, had decided to take responsibility for a problem that was not theirs. The galaxy had shuddered when humans showed up. They had expected these newcomers to fail. They had expected them to be consumed like so many others before. Instead, humanity had taught them a new lesson. Some species run from darkness. Some species hide from it. Humans walk straight into it and start swinging. The elder races would not forget that lesson. For thousands of years to come, they would tell stories about the humans who had crossed the galaxy to face the Great Terror. They would speak of Admiral Chun and Captain Tanaka and Lieutenant Reeves. They would remember the soldiers who had fought and the crews who had sacrificed. And whenever someone asked why the humans had done it, the answer would always be the same. Because someone had to. And humans always finished what they started.